Welcome to our Profiles in Leadership podcast. My name is Daryl Lim, and I'm a professor at Penn State Dickinson Law. I'm very pleased to be joined by Lisa Jorgenson, the Deputy Director General at the World IP organization, and she is in charge of patents and technology. Lisa, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me, Daryl. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Very pleased to have you and to invite you to really reflect on your journey and share some leadership lessons with our viewers. So let's start from the very beginning. Tell us where you're from. Tell us about your early education and how those experiences might have shaped you.
Okay. Well, not going back too terribly early. I have moved around the United States quite a bit before I ended up in college at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana, where I got a degree in biology. Interestingly enough, though, I then went to Westinghouse to sell electrical equipment, mostly in the Chicago, Michigan, Wisconsin area, Indiana area, for a variety of different industries, ending up with the nuclear power industry at Commonwealth Edison. From there, though, I went to law school at night, John Marshall Law School, that you're very familiar with, which is now part of, which is now part of UIC. And from there, my husband and I moved down to Texas. He also went to law school with me, so we moved to Texas, where we could find a nice sized town, that Dallas, that would support two careers. And from there, I moved first into a small litigation boutique. But from there, after a couple of years, I then went back into a corporation that I was from. I was very happy and comfortable with corporate life. Went to ST Microelectronics, where I was for the last 13 years of my almost 25 years there, was the chief IP counsel for the patent and technology section of ST. From there, I worked a lot on patents, on patent licensing, on litigation support, multilateral agreements, etc. We had a worldwide team of patent practitioners, patent attorneys and patent agents around the world that I had an opportunity to work with. And from there, I then went to AIPLA, which was a very different environment. It was very interesting. It was all policy work, which is where I got some lessons learned, so to speak, from working with the group on the Hill and with all of our committees at AIPLA. And then from there, I came over to WIPO.
What a journey. Now, some of our listeners are law students. So let me ask this on behalf of law students, because people enter law school at different stages of their career. Some of them right out of college, some like yourself after they worked a while. What made you decide that that was the right time? And why Chicago, a place where you didn't have an immediate connection?
Well, I was living in Chicago at the time that my husband and I decided to actually go to law school together. He was with a steel mill in Northwest Indiana, in East Chicago, Northwest Indiana. And we both looked at the career paths that we were on and said we'd like to be able to enhance those career paths. And how do we do that? We actually did both work together on a master's in business at Purdue University Northwest campus. But from there, we said, is this it for both of our careers? Is this really what we want? We wanted to be able to enhance them further yet. We decided to go to law school. We actually did not go to law school initially with the idea of practicing law. But when we got to 2.5, 3 years into our 4-year night school program, we said to each other, we're not going to look back and wish we had tried. So that's when we both decided to get into the legal profession, and we've both been in it. Well, my husband's now retired, but we've both been in it since and loved every minute of it.
And what would you say was the thing about the training in the law that helped shape your thinking as a leader?
Well, I think, first of all, every professor that I can remember at John Marshall really focused on challenging us to think outside the box. While you're learning the law, you're learning what you need to know for any particular course, how do you think about all of the various issues that you are dealing with and look at them in different ways? And I think that probably helped me look at either as a subordinate or a supervisor in terms of how do you manage the issues, and then how do you manage people who are managing the issues. And I think that's a big part of what helped me get into the management area.
And one thing looking at your career trajectory is how varied the different organizations that you have been part of are. Is leadership therefore something which is fungible, that you can transmit from one industry to the other, or is that something that you have to pick up in each step of the way?
Well, management skills in and of themselves are certainly fungible. And the first thing I would actually say is to anybody coming out of law school, don't think that you know where your career is going to go when you first step out the door into that first job. Because I certainly would never have guessed that I would be living in Geneva, Switzerland, working for one of the UN agencies at this time in my career anyway. But the management skills that you first learn, you tailor them depending upon the industry that you're in, the kind of organization that you're in. So I went from, in-house corporate practice, well, law firm actually, to in-house corporate practice, to an NGO, to then a subsidiary, not a subsidiary, but a specialized agency of the UN, being WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. I think that you learn different skills along the way that enhance what you learn as a manager in the first instance, such as, things like the UN for my current job, very, very different type of atmosphere than being in an NGO or being in a corporation. But to get those first set of sort of management skills helps you then build on that with whatever type of organization or industry that you're in, or type of job.
Is the politics better, worse, or the same, regardless of wherever you are?
There's politics everywhere. You just have to learn the flavor. There's corporate politics, there's politics in the NGO field, and there's politics certainly in the UN field. Some are very similar, and some are, you can see what's happening, but you just sort of tailor the understanding of those politics in the industry or the atmosphere that you're in at the moment.
And unfortunately, there is no idiot's guide to navigating office politics as such, especially within the organizations that you have been in. So how do you pick them up?
Well, one thing is to find yourself a really solid mentor, somebody who can not just be a mentor. In many cases, mentors for me were both friends and mentors and ultimately sponsors. And if you're looking for moving from one function to the next or one job to the next, mentors can be sponsors 2-3 years in advance of when you might actually be offered a next job. I would certainly not have thought about coming to WIPO during the time that I was at AIPLA. I wouldn't have thought about going to AIPLA during the time that I was at ST Micro. With the mentors and the sponsors that I had, they just evolve. But those mentors and sponsors can also help you learn to navigate the politics of any situation.
And how would a young person going into the workplace put up their radar for somebody who might be a mentor? What are some of the things that you did on hindsight that helped you to find and keep these mentors and sponsors?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Daryl. I'm not sure that I ever purposefully set out to say, would you be my mentor or would you be my sponsor, as much as I found the people that I wanted to emulate, and then I started trying to work with them and trying to learn from them. And over time, many of them became a mentor or a sponsor or a coach.
Can you talk about who they are and what is it that they have done that has inspired you and helped you to see them as mentors?
Well, to see somebody as a mentor would be a person that I could go to, that they really kind of would listen to situations that I was involved in where I needed to learn how to manage it, or maybe I was trying to learn something new, and the mentor would offer me ways of being able to reach out and find out how to learn new things, how to make sure that you're prepared for that next job, whatever it may be. As a sponsor, sometimes I didn't know that they were sponsors, because sponsors would typically see a job opening somewhere and say, oh, I think Lisa might be the right person for that job. And they might be talking to somebody in the background that a year, 2, 3 years down the road, I finally find out they were talking to that person. And now suddenly I'm being offered another job.
It sounds like a whole lot of serendipity, but in a way, engineered by really who you are and the kind of track record that you establish each and every day. Would that be a fair characterization?
I would say probably yes, but I would also suggest that people who really do want to have a mentor, just start talking to the people that you would like to emulate and see if anybody there is free to be a mentor for you and willing to do it, and then start building that relationship.
And then the flip side of that, of course, is then you, Lisa, being a mentor. How do you see yourself as a mentor, and what are some of the areas or the individuals that you're pouring yourself into at this stage of where you are?
Yeah, there's probably 2 areas. One would be inside WIPO, and the other would be outside WIPO. Inside WIPO, I'm constantly looking for the staff that maybe report to me, or staff that report to somebody else, but are looking for ways of gaining knowledge and an understanding of how to handle situations, how to maybe look at their own career path and ask me questions about what would I think about ABC for them. And I try my best to be unbiased, at the same time give them some direction to what they're looking for, whether it's help in, okay, you're in this area, but to grow, maybe you want to get some experience in another area, or in an area where you need to get some skill sets built up to be able to move to wherever it may be that you want. Sponsor could be, and I've been a sponsor both inside and outside WIPO, which is to actively promote somebody. Maybe they don't know that I'm doing it, maybe they do. External to WIPO, it's the same thing. I've had a number of people come and ask me questions based on where I'm currently at or how I got here, that says, how can I do the same thing or something similar? And then it's a matter of being able to say, can I help that person? And if I can, I'll sit down with them anytime and kind of go through with them what it is they're looking for, how they might perceive their own career path, and if there's a way for me to help them.
Institutionally at WIPO, do you see a structure where more senior leaders mentor mid-level or more junior officers, or is it more of an ad hoc arrangement?
Well, I don't know if I would say that it is a very formal relationship or situation. I think it's informal, but I think that especially with Darren Tang in charge now, with kind of opening up.
And for folks that don't know Darren Tang, who's Darren Tang?
Yeah, Darren is our Director General. He's the head of the organization. He's very energetic, very moving forward type person, a lot of collaboration involved, break down the silo barriers, and he's really looking for ways to also help the staff grow, because we have competition and we need to continue to evolve. So how do we help staff grow? I think I would venture to say every senior leader that I'm aware of inside WIPO, or that all of the senior leaders in WIPO will always put themselves in a situation of trying to help somebody who wants to further their career.
And when you talk about competition, who is your competition?
Well, that depends on probably what area of WIPO we're dealing with. I mean, we're talking about everything from the PCT versus Paris route patent filings to, oh geez, it could be also the trademark practice. It could be our abilities to offer capacity building versus other organizations. We want to be at the top of our game, so people will look to WIPO as the one-stop shop for anything that's related to our registries or supporting the member states and the constituents, the stakeholders in this member states.
Yeah, that strikes me as both intriguing and multimodal, I should say, because intriguing because you think of an organization that has no peer. It's WIPO, because where else would you go for these treaty-related filings? You are the one-stop shop, but at the same time, there's a lot of interdependence with national officers, with private stakeholders, and so in a sense, you need, in addition to be the service center par excellence, you also need to be a diplomat. You also need to be an entrepreneur, and all these different skill sets which come in when you talk about competition, human resource, of course, as you mentioned. Now, amidst all of these different challenges, how do you stay sane?
Oh boy, that's an interesting one. We move so fast here. It's hard to be seated too long before you're moving on to the next issue or topic, but that's part of the fun of it, I think. I don't have any 2 days that are alike, which also is very interesting for me. But it's a matter of being able to balance, for me, the project work of the 7 divisions that report to me, or the programs that we run, versus managing the budget and the budget and finance issues, as well as the HR issues. But staying sane means that we have, for me, just a great, incredibly good group of people working with me, that really I can trust and know that the work will be done when we figure out what we want to do, how we want to do it, that there will be good people to manage that. So when I know that I've got great people, and I do, it makes it all the difference in the world.
Would you describe yourself more as a here's the job, delegate, go forth and conquer type of a leader, or are you on the ground working with them and looking at the details the way that they are looking at it?
Well, that's a great question, Daryl, because I think it really depends on what we're working on. If it's the institutional registry work, my senior staff and myself will set some strategies, and I trust them to go get the work done. I'm not a micromanager in that sense at all. If we're doing something brand new, so I have a new senior counsel for IP and gender, for example. The work that we started over the last year, I've been on the ground in the details with her. So it really depends on what area we're talking about. I've gotten involved in the details, not so much micromanagement of them, but really in the details, that when we're creating a new program, some new way of dealing with customer service. But once things are up and running, I've got great people, and I don't want to micromanage them, because I know they're going to be able to do good work and get the work done.
Talk about IP and gender. Sure, not too long after, I wouldn't say shortly, but certainly not too long after you were appointed, WIPO put out a press release. There was quite a fair bit of interest publicly about your portfolio as gender champion. Why has this come about now, at this point of WIPO's history, and what are some of your priorities for this position?
Well, okay, great, because Darren, again, Darren Tang has really opened up the door for WIPO to do a lot more with our outreach to SMEs, to women, to youth. And as part of that, and in working on the Sustainable Development Goals with the UN, we wanted to have a very solid base for the women's issues, with the IP and gender. So ways of working with women, whether they're in an SME, in a corporation, or maybe part of a national IP office, or just an individual, finding ways to help the women get involved in IP that will help them in their own situation, their economic situation, or if they're an inventor, let's say, or somebody that's created a product or service, how do they take that to market? We want to be there to help them every step of the way. So we will work on helping them go from how do you even define a product, manufacture it, commercialize it, get financial support for it. But all along that journey, then they need to think about what's the IP that they're going to need to protect what they're doing to get it commercialized.
And what do you say to national governments and the IP officers there who face resistance in a larger role for women because of cultural reasons and because of political reasons and so on? Do you just say, well, we'll carve that out, we'll leave that aside? Or do you also engage these governments just differently?
Well, we're very engaged in our member states with the national IP offices, as well as other government agencies within many of the member states, to do things like figure out what legislation maybe they want to have to help promote women in IP, or IP and gender issues, both inside an IPO, an IP office, or to help, let's say, their inventors and people who want to trademark or get a design right in something that they've created. We're working with a lot of them in doing that. We're doing a lot of research that we can share with the member states, and just trying to figure out where is that gap of the women in IP versus where we want to see them get to.
AIPLA and WIPO are both IP organizations, but clearly very different in focus and clearly they're very different in scope. How much of what you learned as executive director of AIPLA is relevant, and how much is different about these two organizations?
Well, let's add ST to that, because I think that the managements from the HR side, the financial budgetary side, creating and tracking programs, projects, that's probably a little more like being in a corporation. The actual programs themselves and the people that we're dealing with governments, dealing with the ambassadors here in Geneva, and other government agencies back in country or with the member states. That probably was more like what I did at AIPLA. So combining the two has made it, my ability to combine the two has given me a little bit broader background. Now, I was not a diplomat when I came here. So the hardest part for me was to learn sort of the diplomatic side, who I'm working with, who we want to work with, how do we support the member states. But all in all, it's very similar to how do you help a member of your organization. That in part, that's like what we did at AIPLA, but on a much bigger scale for us here.
Do you do business on the golf course?
My clubs are sitting back in a warehouse in Northern Virginia, so no.
Well, I take it you spend more time in the mountains these days.
I do. I took up snowshoeing up in the Jura Mountains in both Switzerland and in France. So yes, I spend a lot of time now up there in the mountains. It's absolutely beautiful.
How do you as a leader make this cultural transition? The type of people that you work with, obviously all still talented, intelligent, hardworking in the US and where you are in Geneva, but surely cultural differences exist. And how do you, if you like, change the frequency in which you broadcast, and in so doing connect with your new colleagues?
Okay, well, that's a pretty broad question in the sense that what I find, and I'm actually going to say it from this perspective, what I find really fun and interesting here at WIPO is it's not a cultural difference like US versus non-US. WIPO is every single country, every 193 member states here that we are working with. And I find that to be really interesting, but it means you have to really listen. You have to understand their point of view, where they're coming from, and don't make assumptions. And I think that was true in the US as well, but here it's 193 different types of assumptions that you don't want to make, or the member states. You want to know what they're thinking, what their background is, where they're coming from. Maybe it's a difference between somebody working for a developed country versus a developing country or a least developed country. They all may want the same thing, but they're all coming at it from a different perspective. And so you really have to understand what their perspective is.
And how do you do that?
Well, one is you talk to a lot of people that are from those member states. You do a lot of research on the economic situation in states, even if we're talking about patents or the PCT or the patent law treaty or something like that. You still have to really understand the country, the economics of the country, what they need, and what they already have, and how can we take them from step A to step B. As an example, maybe when we're talking about offering legislative advice, patent legislative advice or trade secret legislative advice, we really need to understand the economic situation. We need to know what other treaties around the world they've been involved in and what they've signed up to, so we know what their starting point is. Did they sign up to TRIPS? Are they part of WTO? That comes into play even for WIPO as we're trying to figure out what will be the best legislative advice and options that we can give them.
Do you still see a north-south divide in the countries that you deal with, and a divide between folks that see WIPO as an agent of the developed country, the developed world, that says we're really using IP, like MNCs, how MNCs were seen for many developing countries as a way of exploitation rather than a genuine means of engagement and uplifting?
Well, from the work that we've done inside PTS, which is my sector, the patents and technology law sector, and I think it's probably pretty true across most of WIPO, our relationship with member states has just been fantastic. Whether it's a least developed country, a developing country, developed country, they're all looking to try to find ways, and it's what we want to help them do, is change their economic situation. Now, especially for developing countries and least developed countries, that's going to be the case. But for developed countries, they're not all on the same page. So the question is, how can we help them? Maybe as an example, how can WIPO help the US with getting women engaged in the IP system and getting more girls into STEM? That's a worldwide problem that we're all working towards finding better ways of doing things for them. So it may be dependent on the issue, but I don't see a divide in terms of the ability for WIPO to work with a member state and try to help their situation.
Talk about this initiative that you have with the US Patent and Trademark Office on bringing women into the IP system. How did it come about, and where are you now in terms of that collaboration?
Well, our collaboration is growing between WIPO and USPTO. We're looking at a couple of different things. One is actually not an area that I'm involved in from IP and gender, but it's more of the gender equity situation. How do you find ways to make sure that women are treated the same as their male counterparts, whether it's in a national office or somewhere else? The other part is really where we're working on, which is the IP and gender planning. How do you get women engaged in the IP system? I mean, one example is World IP Day that's coming up in April. So we're working with all of the national IP offices, and in particular, we're working closely with the USPTO and the NGOs like AIPLA, IPO, ABA, to work with them on making sure that World IP Day is really well laid out and offered to everybody throughout the US.
And what about countries that don't have an AIPLA or IPO or ABA, where they simply don't have that infrastructure? What role can WIPO play to make sure that you have results which are still meaningful?
Well, even though they may not have a national bar association in that country, the majority of them have some type of an IPO or a national IP office, or other government agencies or entities that we work very closely with. So we will work through them if there's no other entity. But even if there is another entity, even if there was a bar association, we would work very closely with those government entities to try to make sure that they're offered solutions to issues that they have.
Now, we have moved in some ways into a new normal with what's been going on in Eastern Europe. And there have been reports just this week, in fact, from the government in Belarus, that IP from unfriendly countries will not be respected. There's a lot of ambiguity as to what that means in terms of enforcement and the government's role in it. But this marks a type of departure from perhaps the type of norms on practices that we have come to expect, certainly post-TRIPS. Are you concerned about what's going on, and what do you see WIPO's role in managing the IP aspect of geopolitics?
We're all concerned with what's going on. It's not a good situation for anybody, but there are treaties in place, and so if somebody's not violating a treaty, then we're okay. I mean, in terms of the patent prosecution or patent application side of things. We are watching everything very closely to make sure that the applicants' rights are not diminished, and that they follow the treaty work. So, beyond that, there's not a lot for us to really say or do at this point in time. We're watching it very carefully, providing all the assistance that we can, and beyond that, I don't think there's a lot of need for us to get into the middle of the issues.
Is there redress for, or rather against, the member state that has breached its treaty obligations?
Well, what treaties are you talking about here?
Well, it could be TRIPS, it could be any one of the other more IP-specific treaties that member states might suspend or flout.
Okay, well, the only ones that I can talk about are really the PCT or the PLT. So with regards to the PCT, we watch all of the actions taken very carefully. If we see some area that is not performing what they should be doing under the PCT, we will address the issue directly with that country. And that's I suppose that would be what you're calling the redress. If an applicant comes to us and says they have a problem, we will look into the issue and do what we can to help with, resolve that issue in that country.
And TRIPS, of course, being an instrument of the WTO, would be taken up in that forum.
Correct.
How closely do you work with the WTO?
Pretty closely. I mean, we have a liaison at WTO and a liaison here at WIPO, and we work very closely. We have a lot of programs that we do jointly. We did the WIPO, WTO, and WHO trilateral agreement where we could help member states through the COVID period of time, understand what their rights and obligations are and what each of the three organizations can do to help the member states. So, and we watch very carefully what goes on at the other organizations.
how much of what you see in terms of this coordination between WIPO, WHO, WTO can be further replicated in the member state level? So I'm thinking, for example, of USPTO and the FDA, for example, and the Commerce Department, and to have, if you like, a model form of cooperation between agencies that member states can look at and say, well, here's in the area of public health, for example, a model code of conduct, norms and expectations that member states can take on board, like the norms in TRIPS, like the norms in PCT, so that they have something, a roadmap, if you like, that they can follow.
Well, that one might be a little more difficult for me to answer. So let me try it this way. When we are working with the member states, often we will bring in other IP offices, national IP offices. As an example, if we are offering examiner training, patent examination training, we may bring in the EPO or the USPTO, JPO, whatever, or whomever, that can help us with whatever the issues are for that particular type of training that we wanted to do. We have a lot of very strong relationships with all of the other offices, not just the IP5 or the big five offices, but also a number of other offices and regional offices where we can work with them to bring the benefits of the PCT or the legislative advice or the treaty advice to those member states.
I see. Now, talk about life outside of work and trying to find a good work-life balance. I think one thing that a lot of leaders have trouble doing is, back in the day, putting their BlackBerry behind, or these days keeping their laptops in the office. What has been your secret in finding the right balance?
Well, obviously one thing is I really do like being, my husband and I love living in Geneva, so we want to take advantage of being here. It's a 6-year assignment, so we are trying to do some travel out to cities that we haven't been to together before. I do like the athletic side of living in a country like Switzerland or our neighboring France, where we can get out and really enjoy outdoor activities, a lot of hiking. In the summer, winter is the snowshoeing. But I also like seeing things that I won't see when I come back to the US, like museums in Europe, various areas, or various types of music events or theater events. Things that you can get, but not in the same way in the US, that we will try our best to take advantage of over the next few years. But to me, that's an outlet. That's a way of enjoying something other than the work environment that kind of helps create that balance.
At the start of this new year, what should our viewers come to expect from 2023 coming out of your office? What should we be looking out for? What can we be expecting? Okay.
We have a couple of things that we're really focused on. One is customer service, and the other one is going to be outreach. In terms of customer service, we are looking at ways to provide enhanced customer service to all of our users, as an example. So one thing we're doing is we will be creating, or we've just created, some pilot programs to go in the PCT examination from application-driven process to an applicant-driven process, where we will be retraining some of our examiners to be able to talk directly with the stakeholders, the users, and their representatives, to be able to facilitate better examination of their applications. We're looking at doing a number of other things, like our e-applicants guide that just came out not too long ago, where the applicants will have an easier time to both file and manage their own applications at the PCT. We are looking at things like, well, it won't really be so much the users driven side of it, but from the treaty side and both PCT and the legislative advice side and the treaties in our patent and technology law department, we are looking at not just responding to something a member state asks us, but we're more now into let's say it's an accession, they want to accede to one of the treaties. What do we do to help them prior to acceding to the treaty? What do we do when they've just signed it? How do we manage that, help them manage through that phase, as well as post-accession work to help them, okay, now you've got this treaty you've signed, what do you do with it? So we're looking at ways to really carry from one spectrum to the other in various areas of how to help our stakeholders, both users, but also the national IP offices and the governments.
Deputy Director General Lisa Jorgenson, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you for joining us.
Great to be here. Appreciate it.